The greatest victory of the Third Age was not the destruction of the One Ring. It was the fall of a shadow kingdom that had already annihilated half the legacy of Númenor, a war fought and lost 1,000 years before Frodo was ever born. Its master was a ghost, a sorcerer king whose 500-year war of attrition makes Sauron's campaign against Gondor seem like a swift and desperate siege. This is the chronicle of the Lord of the Nazgûl in his prime, not as a servant, but as a master of his own dark realm. To understand this conflict, we must first unlearn the tales of the South. For centuries before the great wars of Gondor, the true front line against the Shadow was here, in the cold and windswept lands of Eriador. After the fall of the great island kingdom of Númenor, the faithful, led by Elendil the Tall, established two mighty realms in Middle-earth, Gondor in the south and Arnor in the north. While Gondor would endure, Arnor, the High Kingdom, was fated for ruin. It was here the High King Elendil himself had ruled. Its people, the Dúnedain of the north, were the most direct heirs to the glory of Westerness. But glory is a magnet for shadows. In the year 861 of the Third Age, after the death of King Eärendil, the kingdom was shattered. Sibling rivalry and internal strife split the great realm of Arnor into three lesser kingdoms: Arthedain in the west, Cardolan in the south, and Rhudaur in the east. They were divided. They were weakened. And in the darkness, something ancient and terrible took notice. They had been forgotten by most. The Ringwraiths, the Nazgûl, Sauron's 9 most fearsome servants. After their master's defeat at the end of the Second Age, they had faded into the spectral twilight, their power bound to a ring that was lost. For over 1,000 years, they were little more than a whisper, a dread memory from a bygone era. But the Shadow was returning. Slowly, Sauron's will began to stir once more from his fortress of Dol Guldur in Mirkwood, and as his power grew, he sent forth his captain, not to Mordor, not to the south. He sent him north. Who was this creature? He had once been a man, a great king, or a mighty sorcerer of the island of Númenor in the Second Age, gifted one of the 9 rings of power. With it, he achieved immense power and renown in his day. But the ring's poison worked slowly, inexorably. It granted him unnaturally long life, until life itself became a torment. His physical form faded, and he became a slave to the will of the One Ring, and to its master. His name is lost to history. He is known now only by his title, the Witch King. And in the year 1300 of the Third Age, he reappeared. How does a wraith, a being with no physical body, raise an army and build a kingdom of stone and iron? He does not command by strength of arm, but by the sheer, unholy terror of his will. He was a master of sorcery, and a focal point for all evil things. He gathered to himself the hillmen of the north, a people who had long hated the Dúnedain. Orcs and trolls crept down from the mountains to serve him. Evil spirits were drawn to his presence like moths to a black flame. In the northernmost colds of the misty mountains, he founded his realm, Angmar, and from within it, he raised the great iron fortress of Carn Dum, a bastion of shadow meant to bleed the north to death. His strategy was not a swift conquest, but a slow, grinding, patient war of extermination. He would use the divisions of the Dúnedain against them, turning brother against brother, until nothing of Númenor's legacy remained. His first target was the weakest of the 3 kingdoms, Rhudaur. There, the line of the Númenorian kings had failed, and the land was ruled by a secretive chieftain of the Hillmen, who secretly entered into an alliance with the Witch King. Rhudaur became a puppet state of Angmar, a dagger pointed at the heart of its sister kingdoms. The first blow fell swiftly. In the year 1356, the combined forces of Angmar and the traitor kingdom of Rhudaur launched a massive assault westwards. King Argaleb I of Arthedain, who had claimed lordship over all of Old Arnor, met them on the line of the Weather Hills. It was a brutal, merciless conflict. The Dúnedain were the greatest warriors of men, but they were few. The hordes of Angmar were endless. King Argaleb was slain in the fighting, and the border was broken. But the true prize, the symbol of Númenorian power in the north, still stood. The Witch King's entire war would now pivot around one single, lonely hill, Amon Sul, the watchtower of Weathertop. It was the greatest fortress of the northern kingdoms, and it held a treasure beyond price, the chief palantir of the north, the seeing stone of Annúminas. This stone was a direct link to the south, to the kingdom of Gondor, and a potential tool of immense power against the growing dark. The Witch King was not merely a general, he was a sorcerer. He understood the power of such an artifact and coveted it, either to use it himself or to deny it to his enemies forever. For the Dúnedain, it was the linchpin of their entire defensive line. For the Witch King, it was an obsession. For nearly 50 years, The war raged across the Weather Hills. The forces of Arthedain, now aided by their kinsmen from Cardolan, and even a force of elves from Lindon sent by Círdan the shipwright, held the line. The valor of elves and men was great, but the Witch King's malice was greater, and his patience was infinite. He could afford to lose armies. His enemies could not afford to lose a single generation of defenders. In the year 1409, he unleashed his greatest assault. A vast host poured out of Angmar, overwhelming all defenses. The armies of Arthedain and Cardolan were broken and scattered. The main force of the Witch King surrounded Amun-Sul itself. The defense was heroic, but hopeless. The new king, Arvaleg I, son of the slain Argaleb, fought on the ramparts until the very end. The tower was taken and burned to the ground. It was utterly destroyed, never to be rebuilt. Amun-Sul was no more. Yet, in this crushing defeat, there was one small victory. The king and a remnant of his guard managed to fight their way out of the ruin, and they carried the palantir of Amun-Sul with them, saving it from the clutches of the enemy. They fled west, but the Witch King's forces pursued them relentlessly. The victory at Weathertop was not enough. He craved the stone. The Witch King's war was far from over. The fall of the watchtower had broken the back of the northern defenses, leaving the kingdom of Cardolan exposed and vulnerable. But open warfare had proven costly, even for Angmar. The Dúnedain, though diminished, were still formidable fighters. So the Lord of Carndum changed his tactics. He would now employ a weapon far more insidious than orcs or hillmen, a weapon that could not be fought with a sword. In the year 1636, a shadow fell upon the lands that had nothing to do with armies. A great and terrible plague came out of the east, striking Gondor and all the lands of the west. But its passage through Eriador was unnaturally virulent, and it lingered longest in the lands of Cardolan. The plague devastated the remaining population. The last of the Dúnedain of Cardolan perished, leaving the realm almost entirely empty. The Witch King had not needed to lift a finger. The heart of the southern sister kingdom had simply stopped beating, and now its corpse was ripe for desecration. The heartland of Cardolan was the region known as Tirn Gorthad, the Barrow Downs. For centuries, this had been a sacred burial place for the princes and lords of the Dúnedain. Now, with its last defenders gone, the Witch King saw an opportunity to inflict a final, unforgivable wound upon his enemies. He sent no army. He sent spirits. Fell spirits, drawn to his evil will, traveled from the dark corners of his realm. They passed into the empty lands of Cardolan and entered the ancient mounds. They possessed the bones of the dead kings and chieftains. They animated the corpses of the fallen heroes of the Dúnedain, twisting them into things of unending malice and eternal servitude. The Barrow-wights were born. This was an act of pure, calculated spite, not just a military tactic, but a psychological wound designed to terrorize and demoralize the last remnants of the Dúnedain. He was not just conquering their land, he was desecrating their very souls, turning their revered ancestors into instruments of his own evil. The Green Hills were no longer a place of rest, but a trap laid for any unwary traveler, a realm of undeath that would haunt the memory of the North for thousands of years to come. But this raises a chilling question. Why? Why go to such lengths? Why spend over 600 years in a grinding war of attrition just to destroy a dwindling kingdom and defile its graves? The Witch King was Sauron's greatest servant, a being of immense power and cunning. Was the destruction of Arnor truly his ultimate goal? Or was this entire, centuries-long campaign of horror a distraction? To understand the true purpose of the Witch King's war, we have to look south and east. The kingdom of Angmar was founded in the year 1300 of the Third Age, but another, seemingly unrelated event happened around that same time. A dark power, known only as the Necromancer, took up residence in a fortress called Dol Guldur in the south of Mirkwood. For centuries, the wise believed this was one of the Nazgûl, grown mighty on its own. They were wrong. The Necromancer was Sauron himself, returned in secret, gathering his strength. The Witch King's war was never about Arnor. It was about attention. Sauron needed time. He needed his enemies, particularly the powerful elves of Lindon and Rivendell, to be looking the other way. He gave them a threat to focus on, a fire in the north that had to be fought, a seemingly independent evil king carving out his own empire. While Círdan and the heirs of Elendil poured their strength into containing Angmar, Sauron was rebuilding his own power base, searching for the One Ring, and preparing for the war that truly mattered. The 600-year agony of Arnor was a strategic feint on a scale almost impossible to comprehend. Every life lost, every city burned, every hero slain in the north, bought Sauron another day in the shadows. Back in the beleaguered kingdom of Arthedain, this grand strategy was unknown. All they knew was the unending war. With Cardolan now a haunted wasteland, and Rhudaur long since a puppet of Angmar, Arthedain stood alone. The line of kings continued, but their realm was a shadow. They were forced to abandon their great capital of Annúminas, for they no longer had the numbers to defend it, and retreated to their last defensible city, Fornost Erain, the Norbury of the kings. The Dúnedain of the north were no longer a kingdom, but a garrison. For 3 more centuries they held on, a thin line of grim-faced warriors standing against the coming night, their hope dwindling with every passing generation. The final act began in the year 1940. A new alliance was forged between Arthedain and Gondor, a reawakening of the ancient kinship. It was too little, too late. Gondor was facing its own existential threat from the Easterlings, known as the Wainriders, and could spare little aid. But the pact did lead to one of the great what-ifs of Middle-earth's history. The king of Arthedain, Arvedui, had married Fitriel, the daughter of King Ondoshir of Gondor. When Ondoshir and both his sons were slain in battle against the Wainriders, Gondor was left without a direct male heir. Arvedui, as the husband of the king's only remaining child, and as a direct descendant of Isildur himself, made a bold claim. He claimed the throne of Gondor, seeking to reunite the 2 realms of Arnor and Gondor under one crown for the first time in 2,000 years. But Gondor rejected his claim. The lords of the south had grown proud and provincial. They would not be ruled by a king from a failing northern kingdom. They chose a victorious general, Ernil, as their new king, and the 2 realms remained divided. This decision would have catastrophic consequences. Arnor was denied the reinforcements that could have saved it, and Gondor was denied its rightful king. The Witch King, watching from Angmar, must have been pleased. The alliance of his foes had crumbled before it ever truly began. Arvedui was now known as Arvedui Last King, a name given to him at his birth by the seer Malbeth, who had prophesied, "You shall be the last in the North Kingdom, and a choice shall be given you. If you take the one that seems less hopeful, then your son shall have a new name, and shall be the king of a great realm. If not, then much sorrow and many lives of men shall be spent in vain." Arvedui was now truly the last king, and his final trial was at hand. In the winter of the year 1974, the Witch King decided the time for games was over. The north would be erased. He fell upon the last bastion of Arthedain, Fornost, not with an army, but with a blizzard of pure hatred. This was no mere final push. This was an extermination. But what had changed? After 6 centuries of grinding war, why unleash this final, apocalyptic storm now? Was it simply an order from his master in Dol Guldur? Or had the Witch King, the ancient sorcerer king of old, finally found what he was truly looking for? Because the fall of Arnor was not just about territory. It was a hunt, a focused, malevolent search for the last heirlooms of Númenor, the potent symbols of the kingdom he so despised. Potent and powerful. For among the treasures of Arnor were 2 of the 7 seeing stones, the Palantiri. Had the Witch King's entire 6th century war just been a relentlessly patient search for these lost weapons of perception? It was both. The stones were a prize, and with his master's ring still lost, denying his enemies a means of communication and foresight was a strategic necessity. But the final command had come from the south. The alliance between Arthedain and Gondor, however fragile, had forced Sauron's hand. The North Kingdom had to be utterly destroyed before it could receive aid. Fornost was overrun. King Arvedui, with a few remaining guards, cut his way out of the slaughter and fled north, into the blizzard's teeth. He carried with him the most precious relics of his house, the Ring of Barahir, and the 2 remaining Palantiri of Arnor. He and his men found unlikely shelter with the Losoth, the snowmen of Foroshel, who took pity on the freezing king and his starving followers. For a time, there was a lull. Hope. Word of the king's flight reached Círdan the shipwright at the Greyhavens, who sent a ship into the icy northern seas to rescue him. The snowmen warned the king. "Do not board this ship," their chieftain said. "The sea monster's power is not yet spent. If you have anything of worth, give it to us to keep, for the Lord of Angmar can command both ice and storm." This was it. Malbeth's prophecy. The choice that seemed less hopeful, to trust these strangers and wait out the winter, was offered. But Arvedui was a king without a kingdom, a captain with no one left to lead. He saw the elven ship not as a risk, but as the last vessel of hope in a world drowned in despair. He paid the Losoth for their aid with the Ring of Barahir, boarded the ship, and sailed for Lindon. The Witch King's malice was not so easily escaped. As the ship reached open sea, a great storm, born of pure spite, descended from the north. The wind screamed, and the ice floes closed in like the jaws of a beast. The elven ship was lifted and crushed, its timbers splintering in the freezing darkness. Arvedui, last king, was drowned, and with him, into the bottomless cold of the ice bay of Foroshel, went the seeing stones of Anumanas and Amonsul, lost to the world forever. Arnor was no more. The Witch King stood victorious amidst the ruins of the north, but his triumph was short-lived. A great fleet from Gondor, led by King Ernil's son, Arnor, finally arrived in the north, too late to save the kingdom, but not too late for vengeance. Arnor's army, joined by the elves of Lindon under Círdan, and a host from Rivendell led by the great Lord Glorfindel, fell upon the armies of Angmar on the plains west of Fornost. The battle was a rout. The power of the elves and the fury of the Dúnedain of the south was more than Angmar could withstand. As his armies broke and fled, the Witch King himself appeared, a figure of black terror on a black horse, attempting to rally his forces and slay the captain of Gondor. Arnor's horse shied and fled from the Dark Lord's presence, but as the Witch King laughed, a new light appeared on the field. It was Glorfindel. The Witch King, seeing the doom that was written in the Elf Lord's eyes, turned and fled into the gathering shadows, vanishing from the north. Arnor rode to pursue him, but Glorfindel held him back, and spoke the words that would echo down the ages. "Do not pursue him. He will not return to this land. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall." And so the kingdom of Arnor ended. Its cities were ruins, its people scattered. The Witch King was defeated, but Sauron had won. For centuries, the line of Isildur was hidden, its heritage forgotten by the world. Arvedui's son, Aronarth, did not take the title of king, but became the first chieftain of the Dúnedain. He and his descendants became the Rangers of the North, a grim, secret people, guarding the quiet lands of Eriador from the remnants of evil, their hope a flickering ember in a long and patient watch. The North Kingdom fell, so that one day, a new kingdom could rise from its ashes. The story of the heirs of Isildur did not end in the icy waters of Foroshel. It was only the end of a chapter. To witness the long vigil of the Rangers, the return of the king, and the final war against the shadow that consumed Arnor, make sure you subscribe to the _Silmarillion_Chronicles. The history of Middle-earth